Today from the global lane, 25,000 rockets launched against Israel in the past year. Bibi gets the green light to respond. An attack against Iran's nuclear facilities may be coming.
You have to eliminate this threat, and it would not only be a benefit to Israel, but it would be a benefit to the United States and all Western countries.
Faith's Answers. Joe Lieberman's lessons on overcoming American political division.
Our country needs our unity and needs leaders who speak of things of unity, and we have to carefully use our faith as a guide.
5 hurricanes devastate parts of the U.S., the latest in Florida. Activists demand urgent action to reduce destructive storms and overcome climate change.
We're being told that this is a new norm, that this is terrible, unprecedented. Simply not true.
And it's all right here on the global lane. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has vowed to respond more powerfully than before if Israel retaliates for Iran's ballistic missile attack against the Jewish state. On October 1st, the Islamic Republic fired off 181 ballistic missiles against Israel. Most were shot down by Israeli anti-missile defenses. So what now? Is a bigger war ahead? Well, joining us here in the studio with some insights is CBN News Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell. Chris, good to have you with us right here in the studio.
It's great to be here, Gary, and I'm glad to be on the global lane. We really enjoy the show.
Well, glad you do. So what do you make of this warning from Abbas Araghchi? Is Iran's bark bigger than their bite? What are their capabilities right now to respond if Israel does attack nuclear facilities or elsewhere? Well,
I think their bark is bigger than their bite, and they bark a lot. They've barked for many, many years. You know, that's the second time, the 181 ballistic missiles. There were 350 projectiles, including ballistic missiles, drones, rockets, and UAVs against Israel, April 13th. They were 99% of those were shot down. Most of the ballistic missiles were shot down. When you think of Iran militarily, they really don't have a kind of air force that can get to Israel. The army is 700 miles away, and they're not going to be marching through Syria on their way to Israel. So the ballistic missiles is really the main goal. And now, other than that, is the nuclear facilities. If they can get a nuclear bomb, that's a game changer. And putting that on a ballistic missile, would put Israel, its existence under threat.
Well, I want to talk about that in a moment.
Sure.
But, President Biden says any Israeli response must be proportionate. He wants no targeting of Iranian nuclear development facilities. So how problematic is that for Israel?
Well, I think it's very problematic because Israel's looking at, their very existence on an Iranian nuclear bomb, because they've been talking for years, ever since the 1979 Islamic Revolution, that they want to destroy the Jewish state.
Sure.
Now, if they get a nuclear bomb, they could do that, potentially. So proportionate, why Biden would actually say you got to be proportionate. Israel has suffered 13,000 rockets in the last year from Hamas, 12,000 from Hezbollah, hundreds from Yemen, Syria, and Iran. So how proportionate would the U.S. be if they had that kind of missiles coming in just a year? And if you go back to 2005, Hamas has fired thousands more. So proportion seems to be maybe not a bit disconnected.
Well, what if they went through? What if they got through? I mean, Israel was able to shoot them down, but what if they didn't have that missile defense?
Exactly. So they had the Iron Dome, they had the David Sling, and they had the Arrow that can shoot missiles in the atmosphere, above the atmosphere. So if they didn't have that, they'd be looking at thousands of casualties, potentially damage to military installations. So Israel has to respond, and they have to try to eradicate. And I think, Gary, since October 7th, there's been a change in the mindset of Israelis. We can't live with Hamas. We need to take care of them. We can't live with Hezbollah on the northern border with well over 150,000 rockets. And now we need to do something with Iran to stop them.
Well, just last month, the IAEA reported Iran was close to reaching the 90% level of weapons-grade enriched uranium. That's enough for 4 nuclear explosive devices. And a year and a half ago, the IAEA believed Iran had already reached the 84% level.
Right.
So when Iran's foreign minister says the regime will respond more powerfully, might he be insinuating a nuclear weapon? What would be more powerful than a ballistic missile.
Right. A ballistic missile with a nuclear warhead on it would be something more powerful.
So Israel may have no choice then.
Yeah, they might. Exactly. And maybe this is just the opportunity they need after being attacked in April 13th and just a few days ago when I was, like millions of other Israelis, in a bomb shelter. So you have to eliminate this threat. And it seems like a prime opportunity to go ahead and strike the nuclear facilities. And it would not only be a benefit to Israel, but it would be a benefit to the United States and all Western countries.
What do you see happening on Israel's northern front in Lebanon? Because Netanyahu has pledged to return people to places like Kiryat Shimon and so forth, but they have to be protected. What do you see happening?
Yeah, well, you know what it's like up there, Gary. You've served in Israel and Lebanon. I think that is one of their official war goals, to make sure that over 60,000 Israelis that had to evacuate on October 8th to get back to their homes. And then there's a few million Israelis under rocket fire. So I think the ground offensive will continue, and they may try to establish a security zone from the Lebanese-Israeli border all the way up to the Litani River.
Okay, and finally, Chris, on the Gaza war front, Hamas says their leader, Yahya Sinwar, is alive, and they say they'll kill one hostage every time Israel hits Gaza civilians without warnings. Don't Hamas fighters shield themselves with civilians? So how does Israel save the remaining hostages?
Yeah, well, they do that. That's part of their strategy. They use human shields to defend themselves, and also when civilians get hurt, it's part of their propaganda. Then they blame Israel. So it's just one more diabolical effort by Hamas to really put so much pressure on the leadership of Israel and so much emotional pain on Israelis that consider those hostages just like their family.
Okay, Chris Mitchell, I know you're heading back to Israel soon, so God bless.
God bless you, Gary.
He be with you, and know that be encouraged to know that a lot of people here are praying for you.
Thank you, Gary.
Most Americans would likely agree the country needs to return to being a nation of civility and respect, where people on opposite sides of the political spectrum come together, compromise, and celebrate shared values. But how does the nation return to that place? It may be easier said than done. Our next guest is the widow of Senator Joseph Lieberman. Hadassah Lieberman joins us to discuss her late husband's final book, published posthumously. It's called Faith's Answers to America's Political Crisis: How Religion Can Help Us Out of the Mess We're In. Hadassah, it's a pleasure talking with you about this timely book. First, let me say from all of us here at CBN, we're saddened. Late March, we were saddened when we learned of your husband's sudden passing, and our belated condolences to you. We all loved him here. So tell us about this book. Was it finished? Was he still working on it when he passed? Why did you want to release it now?
He finished editing it, and I read the draft that had some more edits. But I remember coming into his study and saying, Joey, this is a beautiful legacy. It's so beautiful. It's so honest. It's so natural. Joe's dream was always to unify not only this bipartisan stuff that he was doing politically, which was very important to him, but also to have unity. And one of the things he discusses in this book is how important it is for people of faith in particular to come together and to express what it means to, they each have a creator and each worships in different ways, but we need to use what we're taught through creators and through speech. And we have to carefully use our faiths as a guide to better behavior.
Years ago, I had met and interviewed your husband, and many Democrats were unhappy with him because he didn't fit the party mold. After he was the first Jewish vice presidential candidate running with Al Gore in 2000, he became an independent Democrat in his fourth Senate race in 2008, and then he endorsed Republican John McCain for president over Barack Obama that year. But he often said it was more important to put the nation before party. I'm sure before he passed, he was displeased about the polarization of the country. So what were his thoughts?
He disliked that. And he felt that there was no way to really come together to help the country, to make legislation, to make agreements, to make compromises, which are vital to us when we try to make changes. We have to get each other, even when we're on opposite sides of the street, to understand that our country needs our unity and needs leaders who speak of things of unity that are not just crazy polarized thoughts, whether it's in religion or whether it's in politics.
Yeah, we're Americans first, right?
Yes, we're Americans first. And I guess having immigrated from Czechoslovakia after the war, I really get it. And I know Joe knew all the stories and history of the difficulties, but marrying me, I was there as a real entity living through all of those compromises, difficulties, challenges.
Well, I know your grandmother was killed during the Holocaust at Auschwitz.
Yes.
We've seen an unprecedented rise of anti-Semitism on U.S. college campuses. Did your late husband address that in the book? What were his thoughts about this alarming rise of anti-Semitism?
He was writing a lot, and he was very concerned and didn't want repeats from earlier moments in history in the early parts of World War II, and how people were behaving to each other, and the subsequent horrible concentration camps. My father was in the work camp, slave labor work camp, where he was taken with many men. And my mother was in Auschwitz and Dachau. But we had never thought we'd experience this in America, in the USA, the country that welcomed us and helped us be brave and strong, and helped me to be the wife of a senator from Connecticut. I was blessed.
And Joe described himself as an observant Jew. So what effect did his faith and commitment to God play in shaping his character, making him the man that he came out to be?
The terrific struggle. And when I went to the synagogue on Shabbat, our rabbi in Riverdale talked about how certain people knew of these things, and many great scholars, great rabbis, and they didn't give up believing. They continued in their belief, which I was beginning to ask myself, well, what do we do? How can we believe when so much goes on that's negative? And hearing his sermon made me breathe it in and breathe it out and say, life is complicated. And Hashem, God, we pray that he doesn't hide, that he's not blinded to all the suffering we've experienced. And we must stay strong.
How then can our faith and religion help us out of the mess we're in now? What must we do? How do we realize that?
We must believe that God will help us. We must work hard to educate our children and to give them positive words and to make sure that they help us, help each other to create better societies. And we have to have people talking to them, teaching them to work through to the positive, despite the animosity and anger in the world.
Okay, Hadassah Lieberman, thank you for sharing some thoughts from your husband's book, Faith's Answers to America's Political Crisis. God bless you.
Thank you. God bless you.
Another powerful hurricane makes landfall in the United States. This one, Hurricane Milton, hitting Florida just days after Hurricane Helene left a path of devastation and destruction from Florida to North Carolina. Before those two storms, Hurricane Debbie hit Florida's Big Bend region. Francine made landfall in Louisiana in September, and Hurricane Beryl stormed through Texas in July. Is this the new norm? Dan Chavas, associate professor at Purdue University, says hurricanes are gradually becoming more intense and hurricane season is expanding.
We've seen more frequently storms occurring before June 1st and after November 30th. And this is because the climate's warming, the environment in which hurricanes form is becoming more favorable.
Once again, climate activists say these hurricanes are all a result of climate change. We urgently need to do something about it before it's too late. Our next guest believes more is at play here than science. Frank Lessay is author of Climate and Energy Lies: Expensive, Dangerous, and Destructive. Frank, this year, 5 hurricanes have made landfall in the U.S. Only 2 were Category 1. The rest quite destructive, bringing high winds, 20-foot high storm surge, flooding. The climate seems to be going crazy. So many people would say climate change is real. So what's the lie?
Well, they want us to think that. We're being continually propagandized on every single issue. And the fact is we've always had hurricanes. We always will have hurricanes. We can't stop them. And it's kind of a lie, the premise that if we just had less CO2, somehow we wouldn't have hurricanes. It's not the truth whatsoever. In the last 100 years, the most active decade was 1940 for hurricanes. We had 25 landfalling hurricanes in the decade of the 1940s. And we had, I think, five Category 5 hurricanes. Those are the most powerful ones. If you go back through history, the most destructive in terms of deaths was in 1780. It killed 22,000 people. And that decade was very active for hurricanes as well. And we just went through about a 3-decade period where we actually had less hurricanes than historically average. So we're being told that this is a new norm, that this is terrible, unprecedented. Simply not true. Like Asheville being flooded, it was flooded in 1940 and 1913 or 16, one of those two, to the equal or even worse. And there was even a great flood before that that were recorded. So they pretend as if these have never happened. And that's why they switched, I think, from global warming, because it may or may not continue to warm. We don't have any control over that. And they've switched to climate change and emphasizing climate. And there are always going to be weather events around the world. And the fact is that worldwide deaths from climate-related, weather-related type events is down by 90% because we're better able to handle it. We have better warning systems. People get out of the way of the storms. So we're being lied about that. And then we also are lied about how much damage they cause. Yes, they cause a lot of damage. But if you look at pictures, and in my book, you'll see that, a picture of Miami 70, 80 years ago when there's almost nothing there. And now you have millions of people in high-rise apartments and lots of houses, and we have a lot more to lose. So when a hurricane hits Florida, for instance, yes, it's in the billions because we have a lot more people and a lot more billions of property to lose.
And you believe the lies and propaganda spread fear among the populace. Climate alarmism is created to shift wealth to corporations? Tell us more.
Well, that's exactly what this is about. The climate grifters are getting very, very wealthy off the government subsidies. And the Chinese are also getting wealthy off of, or at least improving their economy dramatically, because they make 80% of the wind and solar and some of the only components that go into batteries. They're the only supplier in the world. And they make most of the batteries in the world. So this wind, solar, and batteries idea is getting the climate grifters wealthy, because without the 30% to build and the 30% subsidy for all the electricity that they produce from the government, with money we don't have, adding to our $35 trillion national debt, they really wouldn't exist because they're not economical, they're more expensive. And the corporate interests are getting very wealthy. And climate change is really, the narrative is really about controlling all of this, because everything we do, eat, consume, get, watch Netflix, talk right now, watch this, all require and release CO2. And CO2 is mega plant food. It's airborne Miracle-Gro.
Well, what can we do then? A lot of Americans are suffering right now from this destruction and hardship caused by the hurricanes. The effects of these massive storms is real. So what can we do?
Well, it's a tragedy, and they are real, and they're going to continue to happen no matter what we do. And we've got to do our best. We should be building, and rather than wasting hundreds of billions of dollars, on wind and solar, pretending that that's going to change or fix the weather. We should be investing that money into hardening our management of these issues. Very hard in Asheville, for instance, when you get just massive flooding and dump a couple feet of rain. We should do what Netherlands did 500 years ago. We should harden against weather events rather than wasting money on trying to change the future of the weather.
Okay, the book is Climate and Energy Lies: Expensive, Dangerous, and Destructive. Despite the propaganda about why it's happening, I'm sure you join me in keeping the victims of these storms in our prayers and doing what we can to help. Okay, Frank Lissay, thank you for being with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
A troubling announcement this week about Christian voter participation. According to George Barna and Arizona Christian University's Cultural Research Center, only 51% of people of faith say they'll vote in the November election. Why are nearly half sitting this one out? Barna says they lack enthusiasm for the presidential candidates, and they're not getting direction from their churches. Most want to be instructed on how to think biblically about policy and politics. Christian Broadcasting Network founder Pat Robertson was one American Christian leader who always brought biblical clarity to politics and policy. In 1987, he left CBN to run for president. Although he was unsuccessful, he did succeed in getting Christians more engaged in politics. A decade later, he attended a Christian Coalition conference where he talked about his campaign.
The press was ecstatic when I lost. And they said the so-called Christian right is dead. Well, if that's death, today is resurrection, ladies and gentlemen.
By his example, Pat inspired Christians to run for office and vote their values. Folks, it's time for another resurrection of Christian clout at the ballot box. Many political analysts say Mitt Romney lost the presidential election to Barack Obama in 2012 because evangelicals stayed home. And in 2020, Donald Trump lost to Joe Biden in the key swing state of Arizona by 10,000 votes and only 12,000 votes in Georgia. Our Wendy Griffith recently talked with Baptist pastor, former Governor Mike Huckabee.
40 million Christians sitting at home on a presidential election means that they would have completely changed the outcome, not just of that election, but of every election in America if they registered and then went to vote. And a lot of them don't want to vote because they say, oh, politics is so dirty. And my response to that is, well, how do you think it's going to get cleaner if all the Christians stay out of it? Philippians says, don't worry about anything, but pray about everything. So pray about it rather than worry about it, but then put that prayer to action. Make sure you're registered to vote, go vote, and don't go alone. Take every friend, relative, person you work with, every neighbor that you know who has biblical values and get them to the polls. Explain to them why it's important.
Folks, we should not stay at home just because of mean tweets or nervous giggles. We have the privilege and responsibility in this country to elect our leaders. Participate. Do your homework. Examine which candidates, not only for president, but other offices, best represent your values. And vote. Well, that's it today from the Global Lane. Until next time, be blessed.